I want to measure your shit. Colorectal cancer is the third deadliest cancer in America, and it's the easiest to prevent by far. If you had a device that could detect that, whoa, that could actually save lives.
Welcome to the Nextplay podcast. We're talking about what's next in tech today with Scott Hickle. Scott is an incredible founder working on Throne, the future of hardware for gut health. Toilet tech. How did this pivot happen?
There's a ton of health information in your waste. The market for that is everyone. I think there's a huge potential here for remote caregiver monitoring. Instead of having to send in pictures of your stool to your doctor, having an AI take the picture for you, analyze it, that's already an improvement in the workflow that millions of people are doing every day. Catch colorectal cancer in its early stages, like when it's just a little polyp, your 5-year survival rate's 91%. But if you catch it in its later stages, now all of a sudden your 5-year survival rate is not much better than a coin flip. All these diseases could be much better managed. What gets measured gets managed.
Hello, and welcome to the Nextplay podcast, where we're talking about what's next in tech today with Scott Hickle. Scott is an incredible founder. We met when you were working on a company called Carbon Zero, building or creating credit cards for points that go towards writing off your carbon footprint.
Yeah, the credit card that tracked and offset your carbon footprint. So instead of using the interchange fees to fund traditional credit card rewards like points, miles, or cash back, we use that to fund carbon offsets. And with every transaction, you could see, here's how much my carbon footprint was, here's how much was offset, and here's where I net out.
And so that was, when was this?
We met, must have been 2020.
2020. And so you've had a crazy ride from then to now. You went to work in the music industry for a small period of time. And then now you're working on Throne. You're focused on toilets, which is pretty exciting. The future of hardware for gut health, which I think is really interesting. So we'll get into all of that, but I want to start with your story a little bit. Let's get into your story of becoming an entrepreneur and kind of getting into this. Where did you go to school and how did you decide you wanted to create your own first company?
So I was raised by an entrepreneur. I think I was just raised around that. My dad was a physician turned medical device inventor. And my whole life, I would, spent evenings and weekends at he literally called his office the lab, right? And so that was my childhood. Growing up, I didn't get bedtime stories from my dad. I got medical marvels. He's a giant nerd, and he would, we'd be laying there with the lights out, and he'd be basically regurgitating the cool new things he just read about lipids and cholesterol from the New York Times that morning.
Wow.
And so I'd always known I wanted to go down the entrepreneurial path. I did not expect it to be in medicine. I actually very explicitly, there was a chapter in my life, going into college where I was, I thought I would go into pre-med. And within a semester, I realized no, I'm doing this to follow my parents' footsteps. That's not the right reasoning or the right path for me. Ended up graduating with a degree in mechanical engineering. And by the time I'd graduated, I had just done an internship at SpaceX, realized I didn't want to be a mechanical engineer. If there's anything against it, it just wasn't the path for me. And I had all these friends working in software up in Silicon Valley. That same summer I did my SpaceX internship, and I'd go visit them in SF. And I was like, this looks so much more fun. And SpaceX is really cool, right?
Yeah,
I was literally working with rockets and satellites.
Right.
But I scratched that itch that the 5-year-old in me had wanted to scratch for my whole life. And then I saw my friends having these crazy nonlinear careers in tech. And I was just I gotta go see what that's about.
Very exciting. And you're Texas born and raised, right?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Lubbock, Texas, which is middle of nowhere, Northwest Texas.
Yeah.
I was there until I graduated college. Until I graduated high school. Went to college at UT Austin. And I've been in Austin for now 12 years.
And what is the tech scene like now in Texas? When we met, I think it was around the time that there was this big exodus happening from San Francisco to Texas, especially to Austin. What is the scene like here?
It has been explosive in a really good way. When I first started working in tech here in Austin in 2017, it was mostly B2B SaaS companies, some insurance companies. It was all Austin local entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And then 2020 happened with COVID, and there was a absolute exodus from SF. And at that point, I was actually very seriously considering moving to the Bay just to do my tour of duty as someone who wanted to take his career seriously in tech. It kind of felt like you had to do that. And then kind of weird to say, but like Austin was one of the biggest beneficiaries of COVID in the world, I think.
Wow.
Because
that's so interesting.
It was like we were just like had a much more cavalier attitude about it in Texas in general, right? And, you know, everyone in the Bay left and a solid chunk of them moved here. And so probably, you know, 30-40% of the people that I would have moved to the Bay to be around found their way here. And like Royal's a perfect example. Like I would have never ended up working at Royal had JD Ross not left San Francisco to start a company in Austin. So yeah, the tech scene here is like benefited tremendously from that. And like, you know, some people have started to move back now. Like we've reached normal again. But there's definitely a community here that has planted roots and is here to stay.
That's good that it's positive. Glad to hear. I myself have a few friends that are here. It's good to have a reason to come to Texas, I feel. And it's interesting having like a Texas, because the tech scene in SF almost feels like there was always like this clash where people almost don't want tech to be there, but it's also like the heart of Silicon Valley, and like it also is its own culture there. But in Texas, it almost feels like Texas knows it's Texas. So when there's a subculture, it's just a subculture of the greater Texas. Okay, I want to get into Royal. So how did that happen? You go on to work in the music industry, which, you know, we've definitely talked about how much of a difficult and horrible industry that is. A lot about. But yeah, why, like, what was the scene like in tech at that time when you were like, yeah, I'm gonna go join an NFT music distribution company?
Yeah, so I reconnected with JD Ross at like a founders dinner thrown by Josh Baer here in town. He runs a group called Capital Factory. They're like the biggest accelerator in Texas.
Okay.
And this was like 2 weeks after I had sold Carbon Zero. I was still like ramping down my involvement there, like onboarding, you know, the new leadership. And I had no idea what was coming next for me. Like I really thought my next move was going to be like take 6 months to just decompress and be super thoughtful about what comes next. I run into JD at this dinner and he tells me he's starting a crypto music company. And he was just now, like that day is when he had decided to leave Atomic, accelerator, incubator, like
venture studio.
Yeah, venture studio, exactly. And I was fascinated. I was just like, crypto music, like what are you smoking, dude? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
And we ended up grabbing coffee a couple days later, like took a deep dive into it. And the basic premise was, you know, music royalties are an asset that today is basically relegated to like high net worth individuals. Because like every time you trade music royalties, it's almost like, you know, a title for a house where like you have to get, you know, legal involved to verify that like the thing you are selling is like actually still legally yours. You haven't sold off, you know, fractions of it to someone else. And that drives transaction costs, and transaction costs means that, you know, if you're going to get involved in trading music royalties, like you have to trade them in like pretty large dollar volumes for the transaction costs to make any sense, right? Like when you're paying hundreds or thousands of dollars to lawyers to verify that the transaction's legit, like you're really not going to see less than like $10,000 increments being traded. Contrast that with the fact that like music is ubiquitous and like everyone loves music, right? And so like how fun would it be to be able to say like I invested in Khaled or Billie Eilish in 2017 and like rode the wave of their career with them.
Right.
And that was the basic premise of Royal, which is, you know, the blockchain makes transaction costs like basically zero, but brings full transparency to ownership. So you just need to verify ownership once when you put it on the blockchain.
Yes.
But then once it's there, you can trace back the lineage of ownership back to the original inception of like this music is now owned by a token on the blockchain.
So it's fan-funded music as well, right?
Effectively, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was like a super compelling pitch to me, like just from a first principles perspective, made total sense.
Yeah.
I knew very little about music, knew, you know, modest bit about finance because I just built a fintech company and loved product management. And I knew very little about crypto, but that was also just like a super intellectually fascinating world to like dive into.
And that was the time you jumped in at the right era.
Absolutely. So JD was like, you know, if you're interested, you should talk to like Justin Blau, his co-founder. He's the DJ Blau, 3LAU. First time I met him, I called him 3Lau. I goes without saying I was not a big listener. I am now. And he was super forgiving about it because he ended up letting me work with him.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I worked with them for probably a month, just like evenings and weekends, volunteering my time, just because it was an interesting, fun thing to sink my teeth into.
Right.
And I was looking for something. And then when they decided they were going to like go incorporate, JD pulled me aside and was like, hey, like you come be our first employee. And when you go start your next thing after a year or two, I'll be your first investor. And that is a really hard pitch to say no to.
Yeah.
And to his infinite credit, like that's exactly what happened.
Wow. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
How did you know though, like it was time to leave? Health tech and/or toilets were calling. Well, there was a pivot there as well.
Yeah. We'll get to that in a moment. But so leaving Royal, when I first joined Royal, I recruited one of my good friends to come be one of our first engineers, Tim. And I had met Tim playing poker. We were like good friends. We both had like entrepreneurial ambitions, but we hadn't worked together.
Yeah.
And Royal was looking for a smart contract engineer. Tim is just like one of those savant-like engineers who can teach himself any technical skill set in like a month. And so I introduced Tim to the head of engineering at Royal. Like Dan was like, dude, we got to get this guy. I was like, I know. So Tim came and jumped on. And then we treated Royal as like the dating before marriage as co-founders. Like we were very explicit about that. We met every Thursday morning for coffee and talked about like, you know, how are things going? What would we do different if we were leadership? Like what's going well? And then most importantly, like what do we want to do next? And like we explored dozens of ideas.
And so at this point, it's like 2020.
Yeah, it's like
this
is 2021 through 2022, more or less. I think Royal, I signed my documents to join them like July 4th of 21 and then left November of 22.
Okay.
But I've been working with them since like on and off since like March of 21.
Okay.
Tim also comes from a healthcare family.
Yeah, so let's go into that. So your family, your background, like how many healthcare professionals?
So I have 5 parents.
Yes.
So my parents split up when I was very young. They both got remarried. And then my mom got remarried again, but like is still friendly with her second husband, who's, you know, my brother's dad. And like I'm close with all my parents, and all 5 of them have worked in healthcare in some way, shape, or form in my lifetime. My dad is a cardiac anesthesiologist who then went and started doing medical devices and then ended up working as like the CEO of a healthcare system in my hometown. My mom is a primary care physician, primarily focused on geriatrics, but also a lawyer and was general counsel for my local hospital when I was like a young child. My former stepdad, mom's second husband, was CEO of a hospital in my hometown. My stepdad did like medical device sales, and my stepmom is like a child psychologist and does like mental health. So like just inundated.
so much access to this information. Okay, so you have that background. Your co-founder has that background. And so the immediate problem when you first pitched this idea of starting this company, you were going out to create this, it was not a toilet company at the time.
No, it was a healthcare staffing marketplace, which is like objectively less fun.
But it was a real problem.
Yeah, and so basically what we saw was, so it was 2 things. Number one, after working in crypto, right, like 2021 through 2022 was like the rise and the fall of like crypto summer, right?
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun to be a part of. It was exhilarating, but also like a little bit draining, right? Like you get off a roller coaster, you're like,
yeah,
just take a deep breath.
Yeah.
And the big thing too was like a lot of crypto companies may have been doing really cool stuff, but like at the end of the day, they were not masters of their own destiny. Insofar as like we're all in the same boat that was beholden to federal interest rates.
Yeah.
Like, and we wanted a little more agency over our lives, and we were like, healthcare. Like, demand for healthcare is like completely orthogonal to the macro economy. People are always getting sick. People are always going to need healthcare. Meanwhile, we were seeing there was like, you know, a whole spate of startups that were doing healthcare staffing marketplaces. And a lot of them, like we were talking to nurses, and like a lot of them were just not super thrilled with the way that these marketplaces were effectively built to treat them. The basic premise was, let's build a better healthcare staffing platform connecting primarily nurses and nurse assistants with shifts like one at a time at healthcare facilities, primarily nursing homes, memory care, assisted living facilities.
Especially there's like getting a population, it's getting older. This is like a higher demand.
Exactly. And the macro trends are like
very clear.
Yeah, very clear and like pretty dire actually, right? Like we don't have enough nursing homes to like house our aging population. We don't have enough nurses graduating from nursing programs to like staff our existing facilities.
Yeah.
And like long term, I definitely believe that this is going to have to be solved by like immigration or education we can talk about like, the whole pitch later, but like,
Yes.
I'll refrain from going down the whole pitch, but like we saw an opportunity and we started down that path. We built out the whole marketplace. Like, again, Tim, like incredible coder. He almost single-handedly built out the entire like two-sided marketplace, both the facility side and the app for nurses in like 3 months.
Yeah.
We went and raised a little bit of money, like hired a salesperson, the second most productive salesperson from our biggest competitor. He was pushing like 17,000 hours a week through his territory when we hired him. Like just so much volume. We hired a nurse recruiter and we started going through the motions. And we got 2 things wrong. And the first was we thought the hard part would be getting nurses onto the platform because there's not enough nurses to go around. So given that that's where the constraint is on the supply side, we were like, that's going to be the challenge. What we found is like, our nurse recruiter was just tremendously charismatic and was like able to get, she could sell ice to an Eskimo.
Yeah.
And she was able to get tons of people onto the platform.
Wow.
The other piece of it though is that, nurses would sign up for any one of these platforms because at the end of the day, they're just shopping around for what's the best rate that I can make today.
Yeah.
And that was a dynamic we hadn't realized until, we saw it. The other piece of it is that the assumption we made that healthcare is not tied to interest rates is true insofar as consumer demand for healthcare is not tied to interest rates. Healthcare staffing, weirdly, is very tied to the macroeconomy. And this is like a second order effect that like literally we interviewed probably 75 people before we started this company, like healthcare administrators, nurses. Only one person, it was a real estate developer who built facilities, had like even one inkling who kind of hinted at this. And what it turns out is when times are good, nurse assistants, CNAs, medical assistants, med techs, they leave healthcare because by and large, those jobs pay like 15 to 25 an hour, depending on where you are in the country.
Right.
And they're hard jobs, right?
Yeah.
Like especially like CNA, certified nurse assistant at like a nursing home, like you are watching people die every day.
Yeah.
Like you are like, taking care of them, bathing them. Like it's a really tough job. And like, Tim, my co-founder, his sisters, he has 2 sisters that are CNAs. And like, he would show me like their family group texts. She would like text the whole family like, hey, like one of my patients passed today. Like I'm looking for a new job.
Damn.
Yeah, it's tough, right? You like build an emotional connection with these people in their twilight years, and like that's what they're there for, is ultimately to expire. And so when times are good, they'll leave healthcare to go make 15, 25 bucks an hour elsewhere because when the economy is good, you can make that money driving Uber and Lyft, working in hospitality. Like there's a lot more opportunity. When times are bad, they will flee back to the stability of full-time jobs in healthcare, which means that the demand from the facilities is much less. The facilities have a strong preference for full-time workers. They don't want to be managing a fleet of staff that's coming in like shift at a time, right? They want to have like ongoing relationships with these people. Like continuity of care is a big thing. And so they're like hiring, just gobbling them all up, as many as they can. And we saw this happening, like that shift happened literally the month we started going. And we were like, calling all these healthcare facilities. And like for the previous 3 years through COVID, like the name of the game was you call a facility, you catch them in a time of need, they will sign your paperwork that day and you send them nurses later that day or the next day. That's crazy. Like that, we made hundreds of calls. We got like 60 directors of nursing or facility administrators on the line. And every single one of them was like, oh no, like we're either like have a corporate mandate not to bring on new like temporary staffers, or we're fully staffed. I'd be like, what?
Yeah.
Like
just a massive change in the market.
Yeah. Like how did that happen?
How did that happen?
And they'd be like, oh, just last month or
people
2 months
back
ago.
To work.
Yeah. But that was it. It was like, it all happened in the previous 2 months while we were heads down building. So like the straw that broke the camel's back for us, we had one contract out to a facility who was like super excited to work with us because she was going to be our first customer and, give her like the white glove treatment. But she took like 3 weeks to review the contract. And I was just like, there's clearly no urgency here for you anymore.
Yeah.
Like, so I called her up and I was like, what's going on? Sandy. And she's like, oh, sorry. Like we've hired 3 full-time CNAs in the last 3 weeks. So I've just been super busy onboarding them. I was like, wait a second. When we last chatted, you had not hired anybody for the last 2.5 years full-time. She was like, I know. Isn't this great? I'm like, yes. Like, I get it. This is fantastic for you. Also the end of our business, right? Like we are going to pull the ripcord on this.
Yeah.
Like shelve it and go find more fertile soil. So that was that journey. And that's ultimately what led to Throne was, getting to pull the ripcord on that early.
So before we get into Throne, I want to get into there's a few things you've been dropping in here that I think are really worth unpacking. You've talked about first principles and recognizing these signs, talking to customers, just really being close to the people whose problem you're trying to solve and just being loyal to that. What is your startup education? Are you constantly consuming certain podcasts and books? What is it that is, giving you all these lessons to stay focused on how to build startups and not get too, emotionally attached and drained when things go wrong?
That's a great question. I mean, so there's a lot to unpack there.
I'm sure.
My startup education originally, right? All through college, I knew this is the path I wanted to go down.
Yeah.
So I just devoured all the books and podcast content that I could, right?
Yep.
I do far less of that now. I can't tell you the last time I read a business book.
Okay.
Actually, another quick story. I remember as a kid, I was fascinated with Shark Tank, right? I loved Shark Tank.
Yeah.
And I would watch it with my brothers and we'd be like, Dad, come watch Shark Tank with us. He'd be like, no. Normally he's down to do anything with us.
Why not?
We're like, what? And I just remember one day he was like, Scott, I live this all day, every day. The last thing I want to do at night when I'm relaxing is more of this.
Yeah.
And that was a kind of a core memory for me. And now that I live this and I've worked at 6 startups, I learn a lot more having conversations with people like you than I do reading books. And just in the school of hard knocks too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Once you've spent 5 years, reading all the materials, you've kind of heard 95% of it.
Yeah.
And then the important part is having the discretion and judgment to choose which advice to listen to and which not to.
Right.
Because you ask 10 people in startups about their opinion on something, you're going to get 10 different opinions.
Yeah.
And nowhere is that truer than having investors.
That's a tough one. That's really interesting. So what about from a mental health perspective though? What do you have a spirituality? What keeps you sane?
Yeah, it's a super good question. So I've been doing yoga for 12 years now.
Yeah.
Since I came to Austin, got really into yoga. I was a gymnast in high school and yoga just kind of...
Gymnast?
Yeah, that fell into that one.
Okay, interesting.
Just it was the only thing that fit my class schedule. And I was like, okay.
All right.
And then really enjoyed it. My brothers joined and
it's gymnastics?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Lubbock has competitive gymnastics high school teams.
That's crazy.
Right? Because I wasn't allowed to play football.
Interesting.
So yeah, that's
okay.
How that ended up. But yeah, so then I got into yoga as an extension of gymnastics. I try and just set aside the last hour or two of every night to turn off everything and read, think, take a bath, light a candle, right?
Yeah.
Just that
You're outdoorsy as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You
Outdoor
the
stuff
outdoors.
is
You spend a lot of time in nature.
I love Austin, but my spiritual center of gravity is Colorado.
Yeah. Interesting. I like that. Well, okay, let's get into toilets then. So you send out an email to all the investors being like, hey, it doesn't work. The markets have changed. This company is in it, or not this company is in it, but the plan we had is not going to work. We're pivoting to what we think is, the next great opportunity and makes sense for us as co-founders. And that is toilet tech.
Yeah.
How did this pivot happen?
So we spent about a month and some change turning over rocks looking for the next idea. Because at that point we just raised money, right? Maybe 2 months prior.
Mm-hmm.
And, on the one hand, fail fast, right? Great. We learned pretty quickly that the thing we were doing wasn't going to work. On the other hand, now we have this albatross around our necks.
And you had great investors who were investing in you, and they were kind of not that tied to the idea.
Exactly. And that was, by the way, just you talk about mental health.
Yeah.
Having the cap table that we had just be so supportive and have our backs through that was I'm completely overwhelmed by the gratitude, right? That was not my expectation. And I was just again, just floored by how understanding everybody was. But at the same time,
you were very prepared and you had a plan after that. And
yes, but we came to investors once we knew we had a plan.
Right.
We talked to a couple of our biggest investors very early on before we even had a plan, but when we realized that Pine Way wasn't going to work out. And they were just yeah, to your point, we invested in you, not the idea. Take your time. If you try and force it, you're not going to find a good idea. So try and be as relaxed as you can and take your time. And on the one hand, thank you so much for that permission. On the other hand, we do feel a tremendous burden here.
Yeah.
Having just raise money and, you know, feeling like we're spinning our wheels. So we let go of everybody but one person who we kept on the team just because he's excellent and, you know, he was down for the startup journey with us. And then we spent, you know, basically it was exactly 37 days exploring as many different ideas as we can. And
you guys, like update a number on a whiteboard?
I counted them after the fact.
Okay.
Because like I always joke that like, you know, those are like our 40 days and 40 nights of like wandering through the desert looking for the promised land and the manna.
Very nice.
And it turned out to be 37 days by my count. But the idea for Throne is actually something Tim had pitched me like 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
We'd been calling it Throne for like 2.5 years at least. But like we didn't take it seriously. And so the original conversation was like I had pitched him an idea that like was a vice industry, we'll say. And like, it's not like, I still believe this company was a $10 billion company that absolutely meant I don't want to be the guy to go do it, right? Like, this is not the dent I want to leave in the universe. But I pitched it to Tim, and it's a hilarious idea that we can talk about, not on mic. And Tim was like, dude, that's great. And I was like, do you have any companies that you'd love to start but never will? He goes, I want to measure your shits. And I was like, say less. I get it. Like, that totally checks out.
Yeah.
And like, immediately I was like, you know what you got to call this company, right? Like Throne. And like, started joking. And like, the original idea was like, put like pressure sensors under a toilet seat and like just weigh you before and after.
No.
Yeah. That was the original idea. And like, the funny thing is now that's literally a meme. One of our investors sent us like a screenshot of a meme being like, you know, all men want is one thing and it's absolutely disgusting. It's like a fancy toilet seat that measures like how much your shit's weigh. That was like, that was the original idea, which is hilarious. And I was like, you know, let's put
that's your marketing right there.
Yeah, I was like, let's put a leaderboard on it. We'll sell it in the frat houses.
Oh my
like,
gamify it.
Yeah, exactly. And like, again, we just joked about this idea of Throne for a couple years. And while we're in the middle of exploring other ideas, one of our friends called us and was like, hey, have you guys thought about smart toilets? And we're like, yeah, but like as a joke. Not actually, but like we've named this company. It's called Throne. He was like, wait, you should actually think about it. Like there's a ton of health information in your waste. And I was like, interesting. Okay. So we started talking to doctors. And again, like between Tim and I, we have a lot of doctors we can just call. And I think there was a few things that like started to make it click for us, right? Like number one, colorectal cancer is the third deadliest cancer in America, behind breast and lung cancer. And it's the easiest to prevent, like by far. Like, and if you catch colorectal cancer in its early stages, like when it's just a little polyp, your like 5-year survival rate's like 91%.
Wow.
But if you catch it in its later stages, now all of a sudden your 5-year survival rate is like 60%. It's like not much better than a coin flip. One doctor said really, I think super elegantly, he was like, low fidelity data captured more frequently is often far more valuable in medicine than high fidelity data captured infrequently. And the example he used is looking for colorectal cancer using colonoscopies. And you go in for a colonoscopy like once every 5 years, starting at 45. Like, all right, so there's a few things there, right? Like number one, like young people still have colorectal cancer.
Yeah.
Number two, like no one's looking for it.
Yeah.
Number three, if you catch colorectal cancer in year 3 or 4 of its development on your 5-year colonoscopy cycle, like that's a terrible outcome.
Yeah, 3 years in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the risk you're taking. The alternative though, is that one thing about colorectal cancer is like it manifests in your stool as like what's called fecal occult blood, which is like blood that's like not immediately obvious to the naked eye, but is in your stool. And if you had a device that could detect that, like, yes, you would see blood like from time to time when people have hemorrhoids or like, you know, viral infections or like they're just really sick. But like, if you catch that, and so like any given day doesn't matter so much, but like the trend is what matters, right? Like if you start seeing blood over the course of like 2 or 3 months, now that's not a diagnosis of cancer, but it does mean you should almost certainly talk to like your gastroenterologist and get checked out tomorrow. And so like that was the first like light bulb moment for us. We're like, whoa, like that could actually save lives. And like the market for that is everyone, right? Like who gets cancer is random for the most part. It's not like, you know, breast cancer where it's like super highly correlated to like the BRCA2 genetic variant, right? And it's not like lung cancer where it's highly correlated to like, you know, behaviors like smoking.
Okay.
It's much more random. The other thing is then we started looking at like, wait, there's like actually like a ton of like chronic diseases that manifest in like urological health issues, metabolic health issues, and gastrointestinal health issues. So you have like IBD, like, Crohn's and colitis, you have IBS. I could stop there, but like, effectively.
There's a lot of problems that can be detected
yes,
from your stool in the toilet.
There's a lot of problems. And like, no one's monitoring any of that. And like, all these diseases could be much better managed if you were, it's like that phrase, right? Like, what gets measured gets managed.
Yes.
No one's measuring any of this stuff today. So we're doing a terrible job of managing these diseases.
So when you first told me about this, my thought was, there was two thoughts I had. One was I saw something similar at CES that With Things was working on, and they hadn't launched it yet. And they were very, like when we walked up to them and I would ask them questions, it was mostly, I think, about urine. And it felt like they were in stealth. They didn't want to talk about many of the details. And then the other thought I had was from like the companies like Viome, where you like actually go and take a little scoop from your stool. And so I immediately had the same thought. It's like, okay, yeah, if you could get that data every single day, because that makes more sense. Poop is variable. It changes like a lot. That would be so much more useful. So what about the landscape of like what you were seeing, and what made you say like, no, we need to build a startup?
Yeah. So the two companies you just mentioned are like great examples. So like With Things, they're doing a urinalysis device that's like actually measuring the specific concentrations of various metabolites in your urine. I think right now they have two cartridges. One measures luteinizing hormone, which is for cycle tracking. And then the other one is the 4 nutrients they're measuring there are vitamin C, as well as like what's called specific gravity, which is like correlates to hydration. And like, I think glucose and ketones.
Okay.
And like those are obviously very relevant to diabetics and anybody on ketogenic
Those
diets.
are pretty easily pee on a little stick that you get from Amazon.
Right. So the thing is, and they're using the same technology as those pee sticks, right?
Yeah.
Like those are called reaction paper assays, chemical reaction paper assays, and they make those for like basically any metabolite under the sun. You can find something that will change colors based on the concentration, and they've just automated it so it's like in a tiny little cartridge and it's more or less hands-free.
Yeah.
The big issue with them is it has a 1-month battery. It's like a little puck that sits right in the front of your toilets, and you pee directly on it. Takes like a drop up, does this like microfluidics where it's like, channeling the drop through these tests that are then changing colors. It's reading the colors and sending the results to your phone. Super sick.
Yeah.
Like, I love the concept.
Yeah.
What I don't love is the user experience of having to recharge it once a month and change the cartridge. We're having to then reach back into your toilet, get this thing you've been peeing on the entire past month.
Yeah.
Like, open it, change a cartridge, and then recharge it. Like, so like,
that's so interesting. I didn't know it was a cartridge model.
Yeah. And it's also not cheap, right? Like they're what's quoted on their website right now is like $500 a month. Or no, $500 for the device and $30 a month, which is like,
it's a decent subscription cost. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not cheap.
Yeah.
I think it's a very cool device. I want one personally. The challenge is that like I am desensitized, right? Like I'll change the battery. I don't expect most people will.
Okay.
Like, the other thing is like, I see you're wearing an Oura ring, I'm wearing an Oura ring.
Yeah.
Like there's like this thing people talk about in like the world of like, healthcare wearables, which is like the valley of death for wearables, which is like a lot of people will not wear a wearable after they have to charge it. The first time it comes off the charge, like, and that's why Whoop has like the external charging thing now. Because people would take their Whoop bands off and then
forget to put it
back on. So if you made the charger portable, then the Whoop band stays on. And like, now you compound that with the fact that you're having to touch your own piss. Like, I don't, again, they haven't launched yet, but like, that's a very real hurdle to have to overcome. Viome, like I actually just sent a sample into them this week. So waiting on my results, but like, again, like anything.
It's a horrible user experience.
It's a horrible user. It's terrible.
I hated doing it. Everything about it was so sucky.
You
have to like take poop, put it in this little jar. You have to shake it up and watch that happen. It's like the whole thing is horrendously intimate with your poop.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, and again, like I'm
put it in this bag that has like this like it looks like it's hazardous material, biohazardous material logo.
Downstairs to like ask the guy at my front desk. I just moved into a new building. Like, and I asked the guy, I was like, hey, where's like the mail drop off? He's like, oh, I'll take that for you. I'm like, oh, I hate this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't open it, dude.
So there's definitely a lot of room for innovation in this industry.
Totally.
So the device that you were creating, what makes it unique among all these other devices?
Our big thing is it has to be completely hands-free. Install it once, forget about it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is it's camera-based. So we were looking at, we knew we wanted to do something in the like toilet waste monitoring space, there was the big product question, right? Which is like, do we do contact measurement, which is like, that Withings device that you were talking about, where you're like actually like taking samples of the waste itself, or do we do non-contact measurement, which is optical, spectroscopy? Like, there's a lot of things you can do at a modest distance, right, to learn about the contents of the waste. And camera is like an obvious one. And there's some really cool stuff that you can do with a camera with ML models now, right?
Right.
Like, number one, like, you can track hydration, and like, yes, everyone knows that like the darker color your urine is, the less hydrated you are. But A, no one's tracking that over time. B, like, no one has any idea like how dehydrated you are, right? Like, you just kind of look at it like, that's not great. Like, there's like this, here at UT, there's this famous chart that a football coach put up like, I don't know, 8-9 years ago now. But it was like, here's a hydration chart, and it was above every urinal in like the men's football locker room. And it was like, if it's this color, like what was it, like championship hydration levels. If it's these colors, like drink this much water, this much water, this much water. If it's this color, like, you're a bad person. You're a bad teammate.
You're hurting your team.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's crazy.
And so like hydration monitoring is like, like just very in vogue, right? Like everyone's walking around with these metal water bottles, tracking how much water they drink. Yeah. But it's also like very important from a health perspective, particularly for seniors, because dehydration is the number one cause of accidental falls in seniors, which in turn is the number one cause of accidental deaths in seniors.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And so like, I think there's a huge possibility, like potential here for like basically remote patient monitoring or remote caregiver monitoring. Cause like, again, as we talked about earlier, there's not enough like nurses to take care of our aging population. So a lot of us are going to be taking care of our parents as they age. The other thing is, as you age, your thirst response dulls. So you don't even know that you're thirsty. So you get dehydrated because you don't even realize that you're thirsty. And it'd be great if, as our parents age, we could like just have an app that tells us like, hey, looks like dad like is dehydrated. Check in on him, right?
On a dangerous level.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, that's a really easy, that should obviously exist, right? Yeah. Like, that should obviously exist. And then you have other things you can infer optically, like what's called the Bristol stool scale, right? Where like color and consistency of your stool can actually tell you a lot about your gut health. And like, this is particularly relevant for people with like inflammatory bowel disease or irritable bowel syndrome. And like, there's 3 million people with IBD and 25 to 45 million people in the United States with IBS. And just being able to see like, is this normal? Like, the amount of like crazy, weird deep dives that I've done on the internet in the past few months is like a lot.
Yes.
There's a corner of the internet that is people posting pictures of their poop and asking doctors like, am I okay? And like,
wow, is this like a Reddit thread?
Yeah, it's Reddit. Seeing that, it's like, there's this like kind of like this half joking, half real like startup wisdom, right? Which is like, there's a business to be built around every subreddit.
Yeah.
And like, that alone is like kind of an interesting thing. And being able to, instead of like having to send in pictures of your stool to your doctor, right? Like, nobody wants that on their camera roll. Instead, having an AI like take the picture for you, like analyze it, tell you like this looks within the normal acceptable range, or if it doesn't, give you the option to share it with your doctor without having it on your camera roll. That's already an improvement in like a workflow that millions of people are doing every day.
It is. All I hear though is you've taken on the challenge of now building both a software and a hardware company.
Yeah. But in the post LLM world,
it's a lot easier. Or more exciting? I don't know.
It's more exciting, but also like, I believe that there's a much better moat around hardware than there's going to be around software, because the marginal cost of building software is like rapidly approaching zero.
You're right.
And I think the combination of AI plus hardware is like particularly defensible. There's some research that was just published earlier this year showing that we can estimate the degree of what's called colonic mucosal inflammation, which is like the inflammation of the lining of your colon, right?
Yeah.
And you can measure that using a camera or like pictures of stool or using an AI model trained on pictures of stool, I should say. You can measure that colonic mucosal inflammation just as accurately as you can with an actual stool test, which is measuring what's called calprotectin, which is a protein that's like excreted by your inflamed colonic mucosal lining. That's crazy, because like that test costs $108 to $140. It's the same type of test you were just talking about with the Viome, where you have to take a sample, like mail it in. They like, run these tests at the lab. Like, the results take weeks to get back. Now you can, in theory, run that same fidelity of test at home from the privacy comfort of home every single day with a marginal cost of like zero, and like see how inflamed your colon is day to day. Like, that's wild to me.
That's pretty crazy. But of course, the natural question and the natural pushback is you're putting cameras in people's toilets, and people are not going to love that. right? Like it's the security concerns. You know, there's this idea that even from even if it's pointed down, the reflection of the user and the water and the toilet. What do you hear from people when you talk to them about this? And like, how do you address these concerns?
Yeah, it's a great question and very real, but less real than you might think. So the first is, like, Stanford has a smart toilet lab where they've studied this. They have smart toilets that have like dozens of sensors in them. And they have
that.
I don't know. That's a great question, actually. I want
a smart toilet lab.
Smart toilet lab. And so basically there's two flavors of smart toilets, right? There's like the comfort and convenience smart toilet, like the Toto, the Japanese toilets that are like...
Sorry, I'm laughing.
No, you should.
It's a little funny.
This is the most fun industry in the world to work in, right? Like, it's hilarious. Like the amount of puns that we deal with on a daily basis is like, honestly, it's offensive. But so there's two different varieties of smart toilets. There's one that's like these, like, you know, comfort and convenience oriented smart toilets, like Toto out of Japan, right? The bidets, heated seats, and then there's like health oriented smart toilets. So Stanford's focused on the health oriented smart toilets. Okay. And they have a camera pointed up, and they discovered that your rectum is what they call like a rectal fingerprint.
What?
And that's how they identify users.
Oh, man, that's a hard one to get.
That's a really hard one. That's crazy to me.
Camera pointed up is
That's wild.
That doesn't sound user friendly.
And what they found is, and then they ran surveys asking, you know, the people that they trialed this device with, like, how comfortable are you with this? And like, shockingly, like 30% of people were like comfortable with that.
Which 30%. So that's definitely a minority.
Yes, definitely a minority. But if the camera's pointed down, what we found is like, now it's all of a sudden closer to like 70 or 80% of people are comfortable with that. Okay. As long as it's not pointed at their body parts, right? But like what's coming out of them is like, if there's health information and they're going to get that health information out of it,
it's valuable.
Sure, it cost me nothing.
Is it more valuable though to look at the rectum? Like,
no, that's just for user identification, and there are other ways to do that that are far less invasive.
Yeah,
you know, that's like a very hilarious academic experiment, but like not something I could ever see us productizing.
I agree with that.
But
sounds very academic.
So like we went around and like interviewed people, just literally accosted strangers outside of Trader Joe's one day, and like asked them a dozen questions each. And one of the questions is like, hey, if we were to put, because this is while we were debating, do we do like a contact measurement device or a non-contact device?
Yeah.
And because if we could do the non-contact device, that's definitely where we wanted to start, because like faster path to market. You don't have to do like a supply chain for a consumable, because like all those reaction paper assays are like one-time use only. So then you have not only the hardware manufacturing, but now you have to do a supply chain for these consumable strips. Like, if we could avoid that, we wanted to.
Yeah.
And we were like, damn, you know, that's a big ask. And what we found is like, of the dozen people we interviewed, 0 were offended by that. We're like, whoa. So then we like ran some surveys online and found that like, again, like 70 to 80% of people were like pretty comfortable with it, as long as it's pointed down. And the other thing is, there's a lot you can do with the data to make sure that it's like encrypted, de-identified. So like Aura is a great example. Like when Roe v. Wade was repealed, like, and now, you know, women are, you know, in some states potentially like criminally liable for getting abortions. Like, all of a sudden Aura, who like is also a cycle tracking app,
right?
They're like, wait a second, like we don't want to be subpoenaed for our patients, for our customers
having that
cycle data. Exactly. Yeah. So Aura doesn't even know, like, on their servers who I am. My data is fully encrypted so that only I can de-identify it on my device. But for Aura, like, they have my data, but it's anonymized. It's tied to like a tag that they don't associate with my name. We'll do the same thing, right? So like we don't care, like, on our side who's who. All you care about is that your data is yours.
You care about larger trends, though.
Exactly.
In the human population.
Exactly.
Users. Fair enough. How long until you can get this to market?
That's a great question. Realistically, it's going to be like Q3 of next year.
Wow.
Yeah.
You have a little prototype, though. I think I saw a picture.
Yeah. So we built some very early prototypes using Raspberry Pis and webcams, and like I have one installed on my toilet, and like I push a little button before I use the restroom, and like the recording light goes on, just like these ones over here. And then when I'm done recording that podcast, I stop it, and then it gets sent back to the cloud, and we have some doctors out of Pakistan, pediatric gastroenterologists, like actually labeling everything for us and like applying the tags and teaching our AI models.
So yeah, you're building your own LLM based on your own poop.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. How many people are you gonna? Is like, how does this start? Like, do you have to get this prototype in people's hands and basically start using that to train this model?
So we have like 3 prototypes right now, just for like core team members. we are building, and the reason is like these prototypes are not super easy to install. Like it's like hardwired or like hard coded to my Wi-Fi and my password. We're working on some self-contained prototypes that like you could actually like, you know, install with an app to your Wi-Fi network. We'll have 100 of those ready like beginning of December. And then we're going to share those out to like a list of beta testers that have, you know, agreed basically just to be data donors to begin with, right? Because like for the first 100 devices, like we just need to build a mountain of data.
Right.
And then we're going to send that through our data labeling pipeline, continue to like train our AI models. And then they'll be the first ones to start getting health insights from the app. But like when we launch the app, it's not going to have that.
Right. Are you going to go after the Reddit users? Like the Reddit subthread of people that are posting their poop asking, is this normal?
So some people, there's a few people that I found on that Reddit who have signed up for our wait list and reach out to me. Because like every single person that signs up for our wait list, I reach out to personally just to be like, hey, thanks for your interest. Like, what are you hoping to get out of this? And a few of them have recognized me from Reddit. And so yes, they're on the list.
I like it. In general, you have really interesting marketing tactics. Like when you were building the Pineway, you started posting content on TikTok where you would do these interviews or these conversations with nurses anonymously, right? And those did pretty well. And then
shockingly well.
Talk a little bit about that, but then all the way down to like going to Trader Joe's, standing outside there to get user data. I love that. So yeah, I'm curious, like no dollar spent on marketing.
So yes and no, right? So I'll talk about the Pineway thing real quick. So one of the things again was like we needed to build awareness around nursing and nurses and, you know, that we are a brand that's fundamentally supported nurses. And so I started interviewing nurses on a podcast because like, first of all, like you and I like have been on podcasts before, but like we live in a strange corner of the world where like a lot of our friends have podcasts.
Yes.
For most people, that's just not how it is. So, like to be asked to come onto a podcast is like kind of a big deal. Like of the, you know, dozen or so nurses that I interviewed, like none of them had ever been on a podcast or asked about that, right?
Yeah.
Or even known anyone that had been on a podcast.
That's pretty crazy.
But again, like it just goes to show like this bubble that we live in, you know?
Yeah.
But the concept for that one was, let me interview these nurses completely anonymously and actually get them to tell their stories, right? Because like having been raised in a healthcare family, I can tell you, like when you're with people who work in healthcare and they're, you know, a couple drinks a day and they're loose, they're not worried about HIPAA, like they're with trusted parties, they have crazy stories.
Yeah.
And no one has crazier stories than nurses because they're like the very front line, right? And so we would just like ask these nurses like, hey, don't tell me your name. Don't tell me where you work. Don't tell me your colleagues' names. Don't tell me your patients' names. Don't tell me your facilities' names. Just tell me the stories.
Yeah.
And then we would chop those up and take the most salacious 30 to 90 second clips, throw them on TikTok. And like they went gangbusters, right? Like we had a couple hit like 1 million views. And like within basically like 2 months of doing this, we hit like almost 3 million views with like no marketing spend at all, which was awesome. Super fun because like one of our investors was like, do you guys have any TikTok experience? I was like, nope, but like I feel confident in this. And then like after that, I was like, no, I have TikTok experience.
Yeah.
But the Trader Joe's thing wasn't even like marketing. That was just market research, right? But like you kind of just got to be a little bit shameless.
Yeah.
And like if I'm going to be building this company, I'm committing to a lifetime of talking about like taboo subjects.
Yeah.
And you just kind of got to rip the Band-Aid off and get used to it.
One of my last questions I'll ask is about the industry of healthcare. And like there's a lot of headache and hurdle, and whether it's like approvals, is FDA approvals, or it's like trials you have to do, or I don't know, even how you sell it, like getting into hospitals and so on. Like talk about navigating that as like a startup, like a newcomer. You don't have, I mean, you know, even no matter how much you raise, you're going to be the small fish in this very large pond. That is very competitive, and they don't want you to take their patients and their money away. So what do you do to like, you know, say that, hey, this is like this preventative tool that I'm building is...
It's a really great question. So this goes back to the question you asked about like entrepreneurial knowledge and like, what do you read, right?
Yeah.
Is like, we had the very exact same question, which is like, how do we navigate the regulatory landscape here?
Yeah.
And we bought a book. Tim read the book and was like, yeah, I didn't actually learn anything from that, right? Like there was like a lot of words, but like in terms of like actual tactical insight, like nothing.
It was like, just do it.
Yeah. And so what it comes down to is like so much of, especially in the world of regulation is like tribal knowledge. And you just kind of have to know somebody who's been there and done that already and like find them and talk to them and get their rundown on like, what did you do? Why did you do it? How are you thinking about it? How should we be thinking about it? Who should we be talking to next?
Yeah.
And you just have as many of those conversations as you can. Eventually, we got connected to a law firm from somebody who had navigated this, a very similar regulatory landscape with a device they were working on. And now they're drafting up basically a regulatory analysis for us. Like, here are the different pathways that you have ahead of you. And like, so the big thing for us is, do we want to be a regulated medical device, or do we want to be a health and wellness device? If you're a health and wellness device, it's a little bit wild, wild west.
Interesting.
You can't make as directive claims, right? You can't say like, we are going to help you diagnose a disease,
right?
Or you can't say we're going to help you manage the disease. But what you can say is like, we will tell you if there's blood in your stool or not, or we will tell you how hydrated you are, but we're not going to tell you like how to treat that, how to manage that.
Okay.
What the intervention should be.
Interesting.
If you're a medical device, now you can make much more direct claims.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to prove them, which is the whole point of the FDA. That's candidly like an open question for us right now. Is like, and there are pros and cons from a business decision, because it's harder to market in some ways. In some ways, it's easier. It's it affects distribution, and so that's like one of the big questions that we're answering right now. Is like, what is the correct path forward for us? So far, all the players in the space have not been regulated medical devices. There are some like adjacent devices that are somewhat
like with
regulated.
things it's not like a medical device.
And like every single one of these competitors will have like a disclaimer at the bottom that says like, this is not a medical device. Like, we are for health and wellness, and we're not telling you how to manage your health, more or less.
But it's still a question for you, because maybe that's what makes you different.
Yeah, it's a strategic decision, and like we have some like ideas about the path we want to follow. A, I just want to check out with legal that like they'll give it the thumbs up, and then B, like if they do, like it's a little bit of our secret sauce.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share all these stories with me and the world. Where can people find Throne and sign up to become a beta tester, or give you their information?
Yeah. thronescience.com. So just drop your email there. We are doing pre-sale, so the device is going to MSRP for somewhere between like $150 and $200.
Okay.
If you sign up for the pre-sale, you can get it for $100 right now, and we'll give you, I think, like the first 6 months free of like the subscription service as well. Because like,
wow, and you can do this from your website.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Very cool. And they can find you at Scott Hickle on X, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
I found you on Twitter.
Yeah, the app formerly known as Twitter.
Yes.
I'm at Scott Hickle on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, like everything.
Okay. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Scott. Appreciate
Absolutely. Milan, pleasure.
A pleasure.